before anyone understood what was happening, before helicopters circled overhead, before engineers could explain what had gone wrong. A lake in Louisiana began to disappear. Not slowly, not over months, not because of drought. Almost all at once, boats dropped into mud, docks twisted and collapsed, trees leaned toward the water as if something underneath was pulling them in, and near the middle of the lake, a whirlpool began to form. At first it looked impossible, a dark circle in the water, spinning, growing, pulling everything toward it. Then the whirlpool got bigger and stronger, and suddenly, one of Louisiana's quiet freshwater lakes was no longer acting like a lake. It was acting like a drain. A drilling platform vanished. A tugboat was pulled in. 11 barges disappeared. Trees were ripped from the shoreline. Land collapsed. A canal reversed direction. And then, in one of the strangest moments in American disaster history, Louisiana briefly had a waterfall. Not because mountains appeared, not because a river changed course naturally, but because an entire lake was falling into the earth. It sounds like something from a disaster movie, a scene too strange to be real. But on November 20th, 1980, at Lake Peigneur, Louisiana, one mistake connected two worlds that were never supposed to meet, the water above and the mine below. And once they touched, there was no way to stop what came next. Lake Peigneur sat near Jefferson Island in southern Louisiana. To most people, it looked peaceful, quiet water, marshland, skating boats, cypress trees, a place where people came for bass, catfish, and a slow morning away from noise. The lake was not famous. It was not especially deep. Before the disaster, much of it was shallow fresh water, a calm place in a flat landscape, but the surface told only half the story. Because far beneath Lake Peigneur was something enormous. A salt dome, a massive underground formation created over millions of years. Salt, pushed upward by geology, hidden beneath Louisiana's wetlands. To companies, that salt was valuable, and for decades, the Diamond Crystal Salt Company had mined beneath the lake and Jefferson Island. Below the calm surface was an underground world. Long tunnels, huge chambers, elevators, roadways carved through salt. Workers moved through passages hundreds and hundreds of feet beneath the earth. It was like a hidden industrial city. Above them, fishermen drifted across the water. Below them, miners cut through salt. Two worlds stacked on top of each other, separated by rock, salt, maps, measurements, and the belief that everything was under control. For years, that belief held. The miners went underground. The fishermen stayed above. The lake remained quiet, and almost nobody outside the area thought much about what existed beneath the water. But Louisiana is a place where the ground hides things. Salt, old wells, soft mud, ancient formations, a landscape that can look calm while holding complicated systems below. And on that November morning, another company was working on the lake. Job was routine. The crew was drilling for oil. Oil exploration was common in Louisiana. It was part of the economy, part of the landscape, part of the way people made money from what was hidden underground. The drilling platform sat on Lake Peigneur like any other industrial site. The workers had equipment, maps, coordinates, plans. Everything seemed controlled. Everything seemed normal. But hidden inside that normal morning was a mistake, a small error, the kind that looks harmless on paper, the kind that does not scream danger, the kind that can be missed because everyone trusts the map and because everyone trusts the numbers. The drill began moving downward through the lake bed, foot by foot, deeper and deeper, through mud, through sediment, toward whatever the crew expected to find below. Then something went wrong. The drill became stuck. The rig began to tilt. At first, maybe it seemed like a mechanical problem, a drilling issue, something that could be fixed. Crews on drilling platforms deal with problems. That is part of the job. But this was not a normal problem. Because far below the surface, the drill had entered a place it was never supposed to reach. It had pierced the roof of the salt mine. At first, The people above did not understand what had happened, and inside the mine, the danger was only beginning. Miners heard unusual sounds, scar, dripping at first, then more. In a salt mine, water is not just a leak, it is a threat, because salt dissolves. And if enough water enters a salt mine, walls can weaken, chambers can collapse. The entire underground structure can begin to destroy itself. Inside the mine, workers realized something was wrong. The water was not stopping. It was increasing. What began as a leak became a flow. Then the flow became a roar. Supervisors knew they had very little time. The order came quickly. Evacuate. 55 miners were underground. Some were deep inside the mine. Some were far from the elevator. Some may not have understood yet how dangerous the situation had become. But the people in charge understood. Water was entering the mine, and the mine was beneath a lake. That meant the amount of water above them was not small. It was not a broken pipe. It was not a puddle. It was an entire lake waiting to come down. The miners began moving. They abandoned vehicles. None of it mattered anymore. The only thing that mattered was reaching the elevator before the mine filled. Imagine the sound. Men running through tunnels carved from salt, water echoing behind them. Machinery left where it stood, voices shouting orders. The mine that had been their workplace becoming something else. One elevator carried miners upward, then went back down, then came up again. Each trip mattered. Each delay could mean someone left behind. Below them, water kept entering. Above them, Lake Peigneur was beginning to change. People on the surface noticed the water level dropping, not gradually, fast. Boats that had been floating minutes earlier began settling into mud. Fish thrashed in shallow water. The shoreline shifted. It was as if someone had pulled the plug from the bottom of the lake. But there was no plug. There was a hole that connected the lake to the salt mine below. And once water found that path, the disaster began feeding itself. The lake poured into the mine. The water dissolved salt. The opening widened. More water entered. More salt dissolved. Chambers weakened. And every collapse created more space for the lake to fall into. It was a chain reaction, the kind that starts small, then grows beyond anything humans can control. At the surface, the whirlpool grew. It pulled harder. The calm lake became violent. The drilling platform began to lean. Workers scrambled to escape. The structure tilted farther. Gil groaned. The platform shifted toward the growing vortex. Then, it disappeared. A massive industrial rig swallowed by the lake, gone beneath the surface as if the earth had opened its mouth. But the lake was not finished. The whirlpool kept growing. Trees near the shoreline began sliding toward it. Sections of land broke apart. Boathouses collapsed. Docks were ripped loose. People stood watching something they had no language for. Lakes are supposed to rise, maybe dry out over time. They are not supposed to spin into the ground. Then came the barges. Large steel barges carrying supplies and equipment were pulled into the current. One after another, they drifted toward the vortex. Crews abandoned them. There was no stopping the force now. The barges moved like toys toward the center of the lake, then vanished. 11 barges were swallowed. A tugboat went in. Trees disappeared. A reported 65 acres of land and shoreline were pulled into the chaos. The lake was eating everything around it, and still, the water kept dropping. Well, helicopters arrived. From above, the scene looked unreal. A giant whirlpool tearing through a Louisiana lake. Mud exposed where water had been. Land collapsing into the center. A drilling rig gone. Barges gone. Trees gone. The surface of the world giving way to something hidden beneath it. Engineers and officials tried to understand what they were seeing, but nothing like this was supposed to happen. The lake was draining into a salt mine. The mine was collapsing into the lake, and the boundary between surface and underground had disappeared. Then, the disaster became even stranger. Lake Peigneur was connected to the Delcambre Canal. Normally, Water moved out of the lake toward the Gulf of Mexico. That was the expected direction. That was the natural order. But now the lake was draining so violently that the flow reversed. Water from the canal began rushing backward. Salt water from the direction of the Gulf surged inland. The lake was pulling the outside world into itself, and as that water rushed back in, it created one of the strangest sights Louisiana had ever seen. Get a waterfall. In a state not known for waterfalls, water dropped dramatically into the ruined lake basin as it refilled from the canal and nearby waterways. For a short time, the disaster created the tallest waterfall in Louisiana. A waterfall born from an accident, created not by mountains or cliffs, but by a lake collapsing into a mine. The scene was almost impossible to believe. A freshwater lake had become a vortex. A canal had reversed. A waterfall had appeared. Barges had vanished. And beneath it all, the salt mine was being destroyed. Inside the mine, the escape had come down to minutes. The 55 miners underground got out alive. The drilling crew escaped before the platform disappeared. People on boats made it to safety. Fishermen survived. Workers survived. Your residents survived. Somehow, in a disaster that swallowed rigs, barges, trees, land, and nearly the lake itself, not a single human life was lost. That fact remains one of the most unbelievable parts of the story, because everything about Lake Peigneur suggests there should have been casualties. Men underground, workers on the rig, boats on the lake, people near the shore, a giant whirlpool forming without warning. And yet, everyone made it out. But survival did not mean the disaster was small. By the time the water finally stabilized, Lake Peigneur had been transformed. Before the accident, it had been a shallow, freshwater lake. Afterward, parts of it were more than 200 feet deep. The bottom had been rewritten. The ecosystem had changed. Freshwater fish died. Saltwater moved in. Plants that had lived in one environment were suddenly forced into another. The lake had not simply lost water. It had become a different lake. The diamond crystal salt mine was destroyed. Decades of underground work disappeared beneath the flood. Tunnels collapsed. Equipment was lost. The hidden city beneath the lake was gone. No miner would return to work there the way they had before. And yet, after all the chaos, the lake delivered one final impossible scene. Some of the barges came back. After being swallowed by the whirlpool, several resurfaced once the mine filled and pressure changed. They rose from the water like ghosts returning from underground. The same barges people had watched vanish were suddenly floating again. It was the kind of detail that makes the Lake Peigneur disaster feel unreal, even when every part of it happened. A lake swallowed barges, then spit some of them back out. After the disaster, investigations began. Everyone wanted the same answer. How could an oil drilling operation accidentally pierce an active salt mine? How could an entire lake drain because of one hole? The answer was complicated by lawsuits, blame, maps, measurements, and corporate arguments. Texaco, the drilling contractor, the salt company, surveyors, insurers, everyone had a version of what went wrong. Some accounts pointed to incorrect measurements. Others focused on inaccurate maps. Others argued about whether the drilling location had been miscalculated or whether the mine's underground layout had been properly understood. But the broad truth was simple. The drill was in the wrong place, and in this disaster, the wrong place was not off by miles. It did not need to be. A small error on paper became a massive catastrophe in the real world, because when the drill pierced the mine roof, it connected two systems that should never have touched. A lake above, a salt mine below, and water did the rest. That is what makes Lake Peigneur so frightening. The disaster was not caused by a hurricane, not an earthquake, not an act of war, not some massive explosion. It began with confidence, with people believing the maps were right, the measurements were right, the location was safe, the ground beneath them was understood. But the ground was not understood well enough, and the result was one of the strangest man-made disasters in American history. For engineers, Lake Peigneur became a warning, a case study in hidden risk, a reminder that the world beneath our feet is often more complicated than it looks. On the surface, a place can seem peaceful, a lake, a field, a road, but beneath it may be mines, pipelines, caverns, old maps, bad data, abandoned tunnels, forgotten weaknesses, and most people never think about any of it because they never have to, until something goes wrong. Lake Peigneur forced people to see the invisible. It revealed the underground world in the most violent way possible by pulling the surface down into it. Today, Lake Peigneur looks calm again. Birds move across the water. Fishermen still cast lines. Trees stand along the shore. Visitors can pass nearby without realizing that this quiet place once became a giant drain. There is no permanent whirlpool, no drilling platform leaning into the water, no barges spinning toward the center, no roar of water pouring into a collapsing mine. The lake has returned to silence, but it is not the same lake. It never will be. Beneath the surface are collapsed chambers, a destroyed mine, a changed basin, a deeper lake, a landscape permanently altered by a single error. And that is why the story stays with people, because the disaster was so strange that it almost sounds impossible. A lake disappeared, a canal reversed, a waterfall appeared. It has vanished. Land collapsed, a mine flooded, and everyone survived. It feels like nature performed a magic trick, but there was no magic, only geology, engineering, salt, and human error. The scariest part is how ordinary the morning began. Miners went to work underground. Drillers reported to their platform. Fishermen moved across the lake. Families lived nearby. No one woke up expecting the shape of the landscape to change. No one expected a freshwater lake to become saltwater. No one expected the ground to open. They trusted the surface. They trusted the plan. They trusted the measurements. And then the lake began to fall. That is the hidden terror of Lake Peigneur. It shows how quickly confidence can become disaster. How a small mistake can move through a system until it becomes unstoppable. How one hole in the wrong place can transform an entire landscape. And how much of modern life depends on maps and numbers most people never see. Because disasters do not always begin with chaos. Sometimes they begin with certainty, with people saying the job is routine, the location is correct, the plan is safe, the risk is understood, until the drill goes deeper, until the water finds a path, until the salt begins to dissolve, until the lake starts spinning. On November 20th, 1980, Lake Peigneur did not simply drain. It exposed something. It exposed how fragile the line can be between the world above and the world below. It showed that the ground beneath us is not just background. It is part of the story, a story of ancient geology, human industry, hidden tunnels, imperfect maps, and consequences waiting in silence. For several terrifying hours in Louisiana, that story broke through the surface. The lake dropped, the mine collapsed, canal reversed, the waterfall roared, and the world watched a landscape rewrite itself in real time. Then, almost as suddenly, the violence slowed, the water returned, the surface calmed, the lake remained, but it was changed forever. And maybe that is the most haunting part. Lake Peigneur survived, but not as it was. The quiet water today hides the evidence of what happened below. It looks peaceful because disasters often do after enough time passes. But beneath that calm surface is a reminder, a warning buried underwater, that not every danger announces itself. Not every catastrophe comes from the sky. Sometimes the thing that changes everything is already beneath you, waiting behind a layer of rock, behind a map, behind a measurement, behind one ordinary decision. Lake Peigneur was not destroyed by a storm. It was not erased by fire. It was not shattered by an earthquake. It was changed by a drill, hidden mine, and a hole that should never have been there. One small opening, one wrong place, one moment when the surface world touched the world below, and suddenly an entire lake began to disappear. Because sometimes the earth does not need to shake to remind us how little we control. But sometimes all it needs is one mistake.